Welcome to the Art of Lifting podcast. Today I am joined by Peej. Did you want to just introduce yourself a little bit?
Hello, I'm Peej, or Alex Pearson-Jones. I am part of the GBR coaching setup, both on the junior and on the open team. I've been coaching for a very long time now, and lucky to work with a lot of pretty high level lifters, particularly in the UK. Myself and my business partner JJ run a company called Battalion Barbell, and we coach people to get stronger all over the world. So that's me in a very, very short couple of sentences.
Nice. We'll obviously delve into that. First thing I actually want to speak to you about is when you got into the sport, because you are one of few people that has, there's a lot of people that have been around longer than me, but in terms of coaching scene and stuff like that, like you were one of the first coaches I ever heard of in the sport. And the fact that you're still around, you're still obviously really relevant, if anything, getting more relevant with your new role and everything. So how did you find the sport? Because you've been around a lot longer than a lot of people.
Well, first of all, thank you. I would definitely say I'm surprised that you call me relevant, but that's great. So how did I find the sport? We're talking 2008, 2009. I came back from I worked as a snowboard instructor for a season. Came back, tried to start a university degree, and I was doing a degree in like economics and finance, and it just wasn't for me. I think I lasted like 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. And on the train when I was commuting to and from uni, I was on like T-Nation and Elite FTS and writing programs with my friends, and I just like had a bit of a day one time at uni and was like, nah, I'm out. I'm joining the fitness industry. I'm doing all this stuff for like my friends and whatever at the time. And all I want to do is just like read articles and nerd out on how to get stronger and how to get bigger and whatever. So then I literally just went to the gym that I trained at for a really, really long time, which is just like a leisure center, health club place. And they just happened to have a job opening on reception. And literally like maybe like 10 days later, I had a job. Quit uni and just went all in. Looking back, it was a pretty like rogue move, but it's what it is. And then I basically would be one of the few guys that would open the gym and greet all the members and fold towels, and I would just sit there and read T-Nation articles and whatever Elite FTS articles all morning long as the sun came up, from like 5:30, 6 a.m. until like midday, and then I would go and train, and that's kind of how it started. Whilst I was doing that, I got qualified as a PT, and I did my UKSCA like strength conditioning coaching qualification way back then, and I kind of jumped straight into PTing off the back of that, really. So bit of a weird kind of way in, but probably about a year, 18 months into starting in the fitness industry, I was like working as a strength and conditioning coach, kind of, if you could say that. I mean, it was more like PT with that qualification alongside it. Working with, like, in particular where I was at the time, like there were lots of rowers and rugby players around, so worked with lots of kind of like young talented athletes that were kind of like 15 to 18, particularly in those sports, and then it just kind of went from there. I ended up working at a kind of strength and conditioning type facility, and small group facility in Basingstoke for a number of years. Elite Bodyworks, it's great guys. Down there, worked there for a number of years, and that's when I kind of like got more into powerlifting, more into strength sports. The two chaps that ran the business there, one of them, a guy called Ben, is like big into his weightlifting, is a tutor for British weightlifting and helps kind of write the courses and that sort of stuff there. Another chap at the time, James Smith, was big into his strongman, and they kind of were like, kind of encouraged me to get into some sort of strength sport, and then I was kind of the other full-time member of staff there. So then I kind of ended up pivoting into like the one strength sport that wasn't really fulfilled. Would kind of learn from lots of seminars and stuff that I did at the time. So probably a number of names that are maybe still relevant now, but a lot of names that wouldn't be now as well. Like Mike T was kind of on the fringes back then. But you had guys like Chad Wednesday Smith, who was big and did like a couple of seminar tours, and some of the guys that were in like more of the untested side that were a lot more popular then, like people like Dan Green, Brandon Lilly, and a few others that you would kind of like, they would come to UK and people would go and see them. So Yeah, that was back then. And then I actually started competing in powerlifting in 2014. And then started coaching more seriously in like 2016. And then kind of launched Battalion Barbell kind of at a similar time, 2016, 2017. It kind of became a thing, like online coaching for me, after I hosted my first in-person seminar. I think 4 of the maybe 8 or 9 people that came to that seminar were like, "Oh, do you offer online coaching?" And I was kind of like, at the time I didn't, and I was like, I probably should. So that's kind of where that started from. And honestly, it's just kind of organically grown since, I suppose. And I've been very, very lucky to meet and build great relationships with some people that have kind of allowed me to go on this journey since kind of 18 really, 2019. I can't quite remember, whenever my first kind of international was, all the way to now. And kind of being in some of those really, really cool, really daunting situations where like scary stuff happens and you're like, oh, have I done the right thing? But yeah, so that's me. That's how it started, and I guess some of kind of how I've ended up where I am now.
You've just unlocked like some core memories that I'd completely forgotten about. Like when I worked in a gym and I'd have to cover reception, I used to just sit there Googling strength stuff all the time. And like Chad Wesley Smith's YouTube was just on constantly. I think I worked through all of his videos while I was on that desk. Like completely forgot any of that happened until you just said that name. I was like, that's actually so interesting. I also think, I guess online coaching probably wasn't massive when you got into the sport either, was it? Like,
honestly, it like I had this conversation the other day. Like, it didn't really exist. To be honest, even like when I started doing it, there was like only Lawrence Farncombe, really, who was doing like any sizable amount of online coaching as like a job or kind of alongside his in-person stuff. And there were like 1 or 2 coaches in the US that were doing it. Chad Wesley Smith was one of them. The first coach that I ever worked with was a chap called Bryce Lewis, who ran the Strength Athlete. And he was actually my first like online coach that I'd ever worked with. And I started working with him in 2015. I kind of like at the time was training both at Bournemouth Barbell and doing his online program. And looking back at it, it was carnage. Like, I don't know how I survived it. So I would like go and see Paul Rees twice a week. I'd drive down. It would take me like 2.5, 3 hours to get there. I'd go and train there 2 nights a week, and then I would just stick that on top of my normal training program. I have no idea how I managed it because Paul's sessions were never easy. But yeah, saw some great gains. But yeah, anyway, so there was Bryce and a couple of other guys in the US, and then there was literally Lawrence over here. So when I kind of started doing it, it like wasn't really a thing. And I do remember like having some like people come in from further afield to do like PT with me in person. And, you know, they would kind of be like, well, you know, I can't really do sessions regularly because I live however far away. And I remember like trying to talk to them about online and me being super scared to like sell it and talk to them about it. But also like, it just wasn't a thing. Like, people weren't interested in buying it. They were like, well, why would I do that? And obviously I guess like the meta has really, really shifted. Now it's probably, people are probably more likely to work with an online coach than, you know, go to a gym and find an impersonal personal trainer, which I think is really, really interesting. And to be honest, without kind of like trying to take away my own job here, I actually think a lot of people would get a lot from working with a coach in person, especially like your beginner, like younger lifters. Like, they don't need a super like high frequency, super specific powerlifting program. That's not to say that they couldn't benefit from it, but it's like, I feel like there's a huge part of lifting and learning to lift that is just doing general stuff to try and get a little bit more wound, a little bit more jacked, and doing that rather than just like trying to get really, really good at low bar back squatting and competition bench press right away, which has kind of been lost. And Lewis, who I think you've actually had on the podcast, like he and I discuss it all the time. Like, people don't start the gym to like just get jacked anymore. They do it, and then suddenly they're trying to compete in powerlifting at like 15, and you're like, what? Like, there was this period for everybody like that's our age that like spent 5 years trying to like be a jacks guy in the gym first before we were like worried about any of that stuff. But I guess it's just the way that the cookie crumbles. I think it's also potentially why we see lots of shorter careers, relatively speaking, now in powerlifting, which is a whole nother topic. But yeah,
I completely agree, and I found powerlifting as I started working as a PT, but I spent a couple of years in the gym before that, literally just, I think I was training literally 7 days a week, push, pull, legs, just on repeat, trying to get as big as possible. Obviously not the best way to do it, but like, and I think a lot of the people that have been around since like, even just probably just before COVID time, to be honest, like a lot of them didn't get in, like powerlifting was different back then. It wasn't as like glorified, I guess. So a lot of us literally just loved the gym. We loved training. We loved trying to get bigger. We're like, we can compete in this too. And I think that's where, since kind of COVID time, powerlifting has kind of boomed so much, which is fantastic. But that's where the specificities come in, isn't it? And it's like, oh no, I want to be a powerlifter, so I'm going to join the gym to become a powerlifter, which is still amazing. But I agree with, like, I think that the bodybuilding element has been lost a bit, and like the just trying to get bigger, trying to get around. Because like I had Joe Borenstein on the podcast, and like he is training obviously very heavy all the time, pretty specific. But he even said like his accessories, he pushes like a bodybuilder, like he pushes them so hard because you need that muscle mass to move that weight, right?
Yeah, and I also just think a huge part of it is just like there needs to be this kind of period of like general adaptation. Again, if anybody goes back and wants to read any of like the old school literature, like Cal Wesley Smith's spoken about it. You can look up like old weightlifting Soviet stuff. You can read books like Super Training and all those sorts of like old school formative books and resources. And like there needs to be this period of general training first. And I mean, you could argue that, you know, where we see a lot of talented athletes at 15, 16, 17, they might have had a very, very, very general background anyway. You know, like coaches listening to this might have, you know, stumbled upon a young athlete who was like a really high level swimmer and gymnast as like a early teen. And then they just take to the gym and they, you know, they're already very muscular. They can already really move their body well. They've already got that energy system development. But a lot of these people don't. Like a lot of them, again, because of COVID as well, like, you know, if you're like a 19-year-old now, COVID, you'd have been like 14, 15, right? So like if you lose 2 years of like those adaptive years where not only are you like going through puberty, blah, 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 and all the development that happens there, but you're also not playing sport, you know, you're not doing a lot of the things that would help you adapt and be a better physical adult human. That's sometimes where people lose out a little bit, maybe. I mean, gosh, that's going down a huge rabbit hole, but I do think there's this missing element. And, you know, absolutely, somebody like Joe is probably the biggest and best counter argument to my point right now. Like he's young, he's extremely strong, and he's doing incredibly well. And I could be completely wrong. I just wonder if there's going to be a competitive longevity element that's not there for some of those athletes and lifters. That maybe could have been improved by just delaying the whole thing a year or two.
No, I do agree. I agree.
We'll never know, but that's just like where my head's at, because a lot, like you said, a lot of the people that are still around now and a lot of people that still like to lift now came from a slightly more general background or a different sport and have kind of found powerlifting instead of like powerlifting being the thing from the start and it being all they kind of cared about, right? Which I think is difficult, because when you're playing more general sports or field sports, you don't have that kind of same level of burnout. There's a lot more potentially social element to it, teammates changing, but also just the varied nature of the sport itself. Whereas powerlifting, like, I mean, we standardize the bars, we standardize the plates, we standardize the racks that you lift in. You can even standardize like the music that you listen to and whatever, which you don't have, you know, if you're going to an away game on a Saturday morning for your football team and half your team aren't there because half of them are hungover or whatever, you know, like very different. So, yeah.
I like that you mentioned burnout as well, because that's what I was then going to say. Like, even if you just go straight into powerlifting, I mean, I love the sport and I love the SBD, but if I didn't have other elements to my training, I would get bored. And I can't imagine going straight into the gym with SBD being my focus. Like, I think probably not, you're not going to have the initial love for the sport, like we kind of briefly mentioned earlier, right? If you're going straight in with, I'm joining the gym because I want to become the best powerlifter ever, you're going straight into really specific work, you're probably going to get bored a lot quicker too.
I remember like, I worked with a coach, well, actually where I ended up working, so way back when. So James Smith was a guy that I ended up getting a load of coaching from, who ended up being my boss at the gym that I worked at after a while. And I remember like I was doing some kind of more traditional S&C, like Poliquin style stuff. So like wave loading and, you know, sequencing movements, I guess a little bit West Side, but not quite West Side. So it would be like 4 weeks of pause front squats, and then it would be, you know, a tempo front squat, and then it would be a normal front squat, and then we might move to, I don't know, a high bar Olympic squat or whatever, right? So I've spent like 16 weeks and I've gone through, I might have done a few heavy front squats here and there, but like I look at a piece of paper and I like get excited for a heavy triple. Like on my week 3 and week 4 of this like training block that I've got to do out of 12 weeks. And I've done, you know, a bunch of different variations, and I've done a bunch of different accessories and whatever. And I feel like that used to be like a really, really big, like exciting thing for me. Like, oh, I get to lift this heavy weight. And I think that's potentially like the other, obviously you're going to need the skill practice of lifting heavy in powerlifting because it's powerlifting. But like, I feel like a certain style of programming kind of exists that is like, it kind of takes away that like exciting nature of lifting heavy. So like a lifter has to drag themselves through their training program instead of being excited about the fact that they get to lift heavy. Because I remember like being super excited to be able to lift heavy and like, oh, I can, like, I'm finally like, my coach is letting me go, you know, my coach is letting me go and do this thing, instead of it being like, oh, my XYZ single this week was down, you know. Again, maybe I sound like an old man like on the soapbox right now, but I just feel like it's I feel like you need to have that like dragon to chase, and if you don't, it can be really, really difficult to want to kind of feel inspired or be excited to do a certain thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I've made those mistakes in my own coaching programming before, but I definitely think that's one of the potential downsides to a hyper specific training approach, is it can be simultaneously both more and less engaging for an athlete, because they kind of feel like they have to lift heavy instead of being excited to be able to lift heavy and like about the fact that they are a powerlifter.
Yeah, I guess that's also where, like, obviously, like let's go with the typical method at the moment of like the heavy week 4. But if you're doing a heavy week 4 every 4 weeks, the novelty will quite quickly wear off. Whereas if you maybe every 3 blocks, every 12th week, you actually get to go a bit heavier and push that, you can then kind of build the momentum. And actually, maybe every week 4 is a little bit less intense, and then you get to that final one, and you can look forward to it a bit more, like navigating that difference there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it could be a number of different things, right? But I definitely think that this like idea of some general training or getting away from competition movement here and there could be really, really beneficial. You know, there are so many different rabbit holes you could go down talking about like programming and heavy week 4 and this and that, and like I think a lot of people, but you could again make the same argument against me, have tried to kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit with like, oh, we don't back end deload, we front end deload, and oh, we don't actually deload, we just have an intro week for the next block and whatever. And it's like, you're kind of all doing the same thing. You're deciding whether or not you repeat the same stimulus at a lower intensity after the heaviest week, or you change the stimulus and make sure that stimulus and intensity is scaled back further for your first week. Or, you know, some people even like to like deload or kind of pseudo peak before the heaviest week of training. And they're all valid. I think myself and Jason Tremblay of the Strength Guys tends to prefer to deload / like pseudo peak before the heaviest week of training, if that matters, because it's information that you can then go and basically practice what a peak is going to be like and how an athlete's going to feel a little bit, and you get that information. Whereas others, you know, like to just do like an intro week or kind of slow those first few weeks of the block down to then extend it. But again, like the idea of like everybody responding perfectly over a 4-week timeline, you know, I don't know what that might be, every 16th session, you're suddenly going to be the strongest and possibly that you could. And you're trying to tell me that, you know, a big, huge 120, like a Nonso is going to respond in the exact same way as like a Tiffany Chapon, and everybody should be training on 4-week cycles. Like, there's no chance, you know, like there's no way. So like some people are going to need 3-week blocks. Some people are going to need 5, 6, 7-week blocks. You know, I think the idea of just this 4-week cycle repeating over and over and over again is a little bit, it's a great starting point, right? And I have to say, you have to start somewhere, and that start point is probably going to be 4 or 5 weeks for most people, right? Because that's going to kind of be closer to like the mean distribution. However, that can also be manipulated. And one big thing that I often sort of say to a lot of people is like, if they come to me with like this really, really big idea of like, this is how my block structure works, and this is where I am. And every week, whatever, I'm this strong, and every here I'm weak, and whatever. It's like, oh, okay, but you have been running this same progression over and over and over again, right? So if we were to do week 1 is RPE 6, and we scale 1 RPE each week to RPE 9 on week 4, like, yeah, of course, you're going to be cooked by week 4. But what if we just, went RPE 5.5, RPE 6, RPE 6.5 for the first 3 weeks? Do you think you could then maybe do an extra block? Or an extra week of training? Do you think that maybe if we held back your top end a little bit, you might feel better going into those earlier weeks of training? What are you going to do if you've got 10 weeks before your next competition and you only run 4-week blocks? Like, what are we going to do then? It's kind of like this narrative sometimes can be kind of destructive to an athlete's autonomy, and also to a coach's and an athlete's kind of ability to navigate training well. Because, I mean, yeah, with enough planning, you can make sure that 4-week blocks perfectly fit out someone's entire training year. But that's not that likely. And that's pretty hard to do. Like, not every single time you're going to be 12 or 16 or 20 weeks out. And then, how are you going to figure that out from there, Yeah. But I do think that powerlifting coaching in general, has improved so much. Yeah, some of the things that I used to see back in the day, and unfortunately are still around now, but nowhere near as prevalent, it would just make no sense. The classic, like, take a week off before your powerlifting meets, you can be fully rested, is crazy. Things like that were things that still exist in certain coaching circles now, but nowhere near as prevalent, which I think is, definitely a good thing. And, some really, really good coaches have definitely got a much bigger voice, which I think is great, because there used to be a lot of kind of like pseudo kind of bro science influencing powerlifting a lot. And I think as like the IPF has become more prevalent and people have become more known, or maybe I've just gotten more deeply entrenched into the IPF, there seems to be a lot more like logical voices and reasons around, which I think is really, really good. And more coaches just talking to each other about things that they see and things that they experience with their athletes, which again, I think is generally getting better. Again, it might just be because of my like sphere of influence and the people that I'm around. But I think generally the coaches these days are much more willing and much more open to talk and share ideas, and also just think about different things that they've experienced as coaches. So, yeah. Yeah,
a couple of things I wanted to touch on. The first thing was the block length thing. I think I really like what you said there about how I think it's got a lot better, but there was definitely a point where I've had it with some of my lifters, because typically I start people on 5 weeks and then we'll adjust from there, right? And I always feel really weak on week 3. I'm like, do you? Like, does that mean that you have to? No, they're like, oh no, but week 5 I feel fantastic. And then it's like, okay, well, what if we just run a little 3-week block and just see what happens? Then obviously you just adjust the pacing, and they're like, oh wait, no, I felt strong on that week 3. Like, I think a lot of it's a mental thing, and I think people get so stuck in doing the same routine block to block that they then do overanalyze it in their head. And like, I've had people come to me that have been like, oh no, I have to do 4 weeks. But then let's say you have a my own like I normally do 4 weeks for myself. It's been working really well recently, but between Commonwealth and British last year I had 6 weeks turnaround. I can't run a 4-week block. And like, yes, I could have done like a 2-week pivot as such, but I was like, no, I'll just do 2 3-week blocks, which was essentially just 1 6-week block with a little bit of a deload in the middle. And it worked really well. And it's like almost just, I guess it's just trusting the coaches, isn't it? Like, you just have to trust coaches' different methods. Like, there's only so many differences within powerlifting coaching, right? Like, most methods are going to work to an extent, and then obviously you just adjust things for the lifter. Other thing I want to say as well was about, my mind's just gone blank. That's not good. It's been a long day. Oh no, it was about the networking and side of things, I think. So like you said at the beginning of the conversation, like, online coaching wasn't really a thing back in the day. There was really resources online and plenty of stuff online, but it was all very similar, I think, or at least from when I started, I remember seeing a lot of things that were pretty similar. Like, I think Chad Wesley Smith was probably one of the best people in terms of like breaking things down, explaining things. But there were definitely a few other people, and then like bigger name powerlifters, a lot of the equipped guys, and a lot of the like untested guys were putting all this knowledge out, but very similar methods. Where now I think with the growth of online coaching and just the growth of social media, coaches, they get a lot more chance to talk to each other and share more knowledge about how they do things. And then in turn, obviously, you hear something that a coach does that you quite like the sound of, like, oh, I'll try that, and then I'll see how I like that. And you can me and Lewis spoke about on the episode, like merging all these different methods that have been around over the last decade or so, and just figuring out what works for you as a coach and then for your lifters as well.
Yeah, and I think that both exists in terms of like conceptually, there have been some really, really, really good voices around that have like really sparked up a lot of different ideas. You know, whether or not you agree or disagree with them from like a coaching philosophical standpoint is totally fine. You know, I've been really, really fortunate to have a lot of conversations with a lot of people that are like kind of on the forefront of that stuff, like people like Jason Tremblay and Mike T, who like will just be really, really open about discussing that stuff, and they are fantastic, and they will just share their thoughts on, you know, what it might be. As long as, well, I mean, I say that I'm able to have those conversations. I don't know if you slide in their DMs that they're going to be like, yeah, cool, and they just open up, but you know, they'll be willing to discuss concepts openly, for us to try and sort of, all of us to try and get closer towards whatever might be a better answer. Like, I don't think there ever is a correct answer, but a better working answer in practice is probably what we want to try and get towards. So again, there are going to be philosophical differences to that stuff. So whether or not, you know, you want to try to use a minimal effective dose in terms of volume to move somebody forward and then titrate upwards from there, whether or not you want to use a minimum effective intensity type of approach and titrate up from there, or whatever it happens to be, are kind of like your two biggest sides of the fence, right? One is going to drive up intensity first, one is going to drive up volume first. But also the idea behind just openly talking about these things, you know, I mean, sounds like I'm really trying to like big mic up here, but he has spoken about so many different things for so many years, both in terms of like emerging strategies, which has kind of heavily influenced a lot of kind of what we might describe as like golden microcycle type stuff now, as well as like some just different ways to use training variables. So like, again, they're not as popular as they once were, maybe closer to like 2021, 2022, but things like RPE stop sets, more like, you know, percentage-based AMRAP work, you know, the RTS guys use that a lot. And then kind of off the back of that, we've probably seen a lot more kind of standardized, popularized stuff where it's like top set and then a percentage-based back down. So it might be like triple at a 7 and then, you know, 3x5 at minus 15% or whatever. You know, and then that's kind of become pervasive more and more so. And it's not that anybody like invented this stuff, but it's like we're using a common language to describe training. And rather than it being like it would have been maybe in like the 2010s, where it'd be like triple at 82% and then 3x5 at 70%, we're now, you know, using some of this stuff of like, okay, well, we're going to use a, you know, an auto-regulated top set. And then as a result, the back downs are also going to be auto-regulated off of this thing. And maybe we adjust that throughout a training block, or if, you know, we notice that fatigue is higher, we can drop this down to here or whatever. That can work really, really well. To be honest, again, Lewis is going to come up here, like around those kind of like COVID-esque times, a lot of us who were around then kind of got together and spoke a lot about coaching concepts. And I feel like a few of us have been really, really lucky to just kind of be around each other and grow up, quote unquote, as coaches together, which has been really, really cool. You know, I see a lot of those guys doing really, really well now, and I'm really, really happy for them, where maybe like they weren't full-time coaches, or, you know, they were transitioning into full-time online, and now they've been able to do that and establish a business and, you know, and be in a really great position, which is fantastic. So yeah, it's been really, really cool. And really, really grateful that was able to kind of network and make those friends. And, you know, not everybody is still in the industry. A lot of people have fallen by the wayside, but, you know, the people that are still around are like really doing well and are probably like some of them better well-known names around. And what is funny is like you flash all the way back to like 2018, 2019, and we all knew each other then, and we were all training together then, and we were all hanging out and chatting all the time then. And it's still the same now. It's just, we've just kind of like slowly climbed the ladders, I guess, or have been able to, you know, have athletes that were at a decent level then that are at a higher level now, and we're able to coach them on, you know, bigger platforms and that sort of stuff. So very cool, very grateful. Yeah, it's kind of, well, Lewis and I were literally chatting yesterday about how it's kind of gone a bit full circle and it's all a bit weird, but it's very, very cool to be in the situation that we are now. So Yeah.
I think as well, timing wise for you guys, like you all, yeah, you were all coaching and stuff, and you've grown obviously naturally with your businesses over the years anyway. As the sport has just gone crazy, like you've been there at the front line for that whole like time as well, which is really cool. And getting to obviously be part of it when I don't know, when I think back, like I didn't ever go to Bucks, but when I think back of like seeing your guys post and stuff, like back when I was first in powerlifting, it would be like Bucks when it had uncapped entries, and you guys would all be there like training like after whatever in Pure Gym, and it's like, and now you just look at how far all of these competitions have gone, and like coaching internationally and stuff now, like it is like you say, full circle moment and stuff for you all, and obviously it's all deserved as well. Like, there's a reason you guys have stuck around for as long as you have.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I don't miss that. I don't miss like being at Morton College for 12 hours. Yeah. There's actually I think Lewis has got him on his phone. There's a series of pictures of me and Lewis at Bucks and Juniors, like sat in the exact same position for like 6 years in a row, and we're both just like struggling. Both like sat like aligned in the same way. I think I'm on his left maybe, and we're both like on these like tiny flimsy plastic chairs, and Lewis and I are pretty much, he's always been a bit bigger than me, but like he's always been like a full 120, and I've been like a very small 120, or like when he's got a little bit lighter, I've seemingly got a little bit lighter. Yeah, just through the years, it's just, and we have the exact same pose. It's hilarious. So yeah, it's those days were long, but they were good. As actually where JJ, my business partner, was originally, he was the team coach for, I want to get this right, I want to say UCL.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I got to know him, and he was coaching a few lifters and having a load of success, and we would discuss stuff all the time. And then, yeah, kind of when I basically got to cap and had a full waiting list for kind of like the first time, I was like, I don't think this is sustainable. And then kind of just reached out to him really. There were a couple other people that I thought about taking on. And I spoke to my partner, and she was like, look, just shoot your shot with JJ, just like see what he says. So I did, and then he just kind of was like, yeah, and been together quote unquote ever since, which has been wicked. So yeah, but yeah, those times were pretty wild. I mean, even like back then, I'm trying to think of that particular Bucks when we were kind of all there. I remember Suzanne and Maddie Daniels both competed. I think Maddie might have beaten Suzanne, I think, or Maddie maybe competed as a 57 and Suzanne competed as a 63 or something. Yeah, crazy times. That was like 2018, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, a few household names were there and are still around now and are still lifting now. What's even more hilarious is that same year, I think, Annie Nelson actually came third as a junior under 63 at the British, and Suzanne beat her. I can't remember who was second. That was either 2017 or 2018. Yeah, and then like the next time she obviously stepped to the platform, she won. That was like COVID, I think 2020, 2021. She won the British Championship as a 63, and nobody quote unquote knew who she was.
Yeah.
And she was like the new girl on the block back then. So it's funny. It's funny how these things come around. Again, I think she's a great example of like, you know, kind of doing general training for a long time and doing other sports, and then kind of as you kind of age through the juniors towards the tail end of your junior career, starting to take powerlifting more seriously because your upper end threshold has the likelihood to be so much higher, in my opinion anyway. And obviously you look at her now and she's absolutely flying. So yeah.
No, I agree with that. Before we go into the businessy side, because I want to speak to you, obviously you mentioned going into business with JJ. I wanted to actually ask you as well, because something I've seen you talk about multiple times online is the fact that you don't need to be competition strong year round. Mm-hmm. And I think that links in nicely with obviously what we've been talking about. And I just wanted you to kind of delve into that a little bit, because I mean, I completely agree. And I think some lifters find it hard to obviously accept that, because you want to see the numbers going up all the time year round to think that you're getting to where you need to be. But actually, sometimes you need to take that step back and allow your body to do what it needs to do to then come back stronger when you then get to your next competitive season as such.
Yeah, so there are a number of different thoughts that I have on this. And there are a number of different ways to kind of monitor what we might call like your top end or whatever it happens to be. But Actually, it's a concept from economics, what I learned in that first 3 weeks I was at uni. But
So it was worthwhile.
the idea of like opportunity cost, right? So most people within reason either have limited time to train or limited like recovery resources, an amount of training that they can do that they can recover from within a given time period that you have. With something like a competition single, it's not that it's that like expensive to any of your given resources, but what it is doing is potentially it's taking away a training set or a training slot that you could be introducing something that's adaptive, that's going to be beneficial to you in another realm. And then we also have to just think about the psychological elements that I kind of mentioned earlier, right? Like, are you doing the single because you just need reassurance of where you are, or are you doing the single for useful information for you and your coach, or are you doing it because you need the bar to validate you and your training? And unfortunately, a lot of the time, I think that when they're kind of like holding on to this thing year round, it's because they need to know that they're strong all the time. And if there's any regression from that or any step away from that, they think that either they're doing a bad job or the coach is doing a bad job or whatever. Whereas like if you're, I don't know, say filling out a weight class and you've got 2 hours to train 3 or 4 days a week, 5 days a week, do you really want to spend half an hour of like 1/4 of each of your training sessions just building up to a top single when you could do an extra 2, 3, 4 sets of kind of like hypertrophy work, good quality hypertrophy work in that time, and potentially get less beaten up, feel like a little bit less quote unquote compressed? I for one know for a fact that I could do, I don't know, 3 or 4 good sets of ascending high bar work in the time that it might take me to work up to a good quality competition single in a low bar squat. So like if I can do that, then maybe I can get in an extra set or 2 of leg press or leg curls or split squats or whatever, and actually like make my legs more wham, which is maybe the goal of where we are in the training year, instead of just having a barbell potentially validate me, potentially not validate me in this training slot that we have. And then like for what? Because if you start a block and you're doing high bar 5s or 6s and you add more weight to the bar, then you've gotten stronger. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, well, we're getting stronger because the weight is going up. So why does it have to be in this particular thing? Don't get me wrong. There is definitely a time for low rep skill work. But, you doing that 52 weeks of the year and maybe you get a little bit beaten up. Maybe, you get a little bit less and less enjoyment each time out of lifting that heavy single. Maybe, you struggle more and more and more with the idea of like comparison or where you were at your strongest or whatever. There are some people that can just roll with it, that can get warm really, really fast, that can do a single and be like, cool, I'm just going to do my back down work now. But there are also some people that can't, right? And there are some people that if they miss XYZ certain weight, they freak out and they hate powerlifting all of a sudden. And that's kind of between the coach and the athlete to figure out. But I think it can be really, really difficult to never have periods where you step away from that stuff. And there are some people that like to do relatively close variations, super heavy, which again is fine. It's personally not what I would do coaching wise, but I can see its value. There's part of me as kind of time has gone on and I've coached more and more and more is like, if we're going to try to get a specific outcome within a training block, we should probably recognize that like the thing that's maybe furthest away from, we can just let go of, because we can get it back. Like the skill acquisition for like a low bar competition squat is not that complicated. It doesn't take people that long to adapt to it. It's not like shooting a basketball or something that needs like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of reps, daily to be world class. Like it just doesn't. And as much as people like maybe Agatha and like how she trains is kind of like shifting people's perspectives on it. She's training more like a traditional weightlifter kind of would. We've seen world-class performances from other people that squat once a week, right? Like Ashton, as an example, world-class squatter, strongest squatter ever in the 105s. I think squats once a week, maybe twice.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's definitely feasible, and it's definitely doable. And I don't think he's competition squatting super heavy year round. And there's definitely this kind of like trade-off between kind of like skill acquisition and ability to perform. And in powerlifting, like it's a heavy and slow sport. So what that basically means is each individual attempt at something heavy and skillful, aka a competition single, is much more expensive than a sport where it's not heavy. Like somebody could shoot 100 free throws in basketball and they're probably not going to be that tired if they're, you know, relatively fit for basketball. Whereas if somebody asked you to do 12 competition singles, you'd be so cooked, like, you know, within that given threshold, right? Because one is heavy and harder than the other one, even though they're both quote unquote sport practice and they're specific to the sport. Obviously your rebuttal to this could be like, well, you know, a basketball player might take 30 shots within a game and a powerlifter is only going to do 9 attempts on game day. And it's like, well, yeah, you're right. But like also, you know, you would practice a lot more free throws, generally speaking, than you would that. So, you know, the idea of something being heavy and potentially wearing away at an athlete's like psyche and desire to train is, I think, something that needs to be well managed, especially if we extrapolate it across a long enough time period. And anybody that's been powerlifting long enough is like, has probably had a year where they maybe competed a bit too much. And they're like, do you know what? Like, don't really want to compete 5 or 6 times a year. Like, that's kind of not for me. I'd rather compete maybe twice with one that's like just a qualifier or whatever. And that's kind of like often ends up being like a sweet spot for people. There are some people out there that will want to compete all the time and they just love competing. But yeah, having worked with a number of like international elite athletes, competing too often is a surefire way that at the end of the year they're not going to like powerlifting. So no matter how much they love it, they're not going to like it. You know what I mean? So yeah.
No, I really like that. And I like that you linked it to other sports as well, because I think that really helps explain the point. Like, even just comparing it to basketball, like you say, like if you've been competing long enough, you're not going to forget how to squat, bench, and deadlift, right? You're not going to forget, even if it feels a bit rusty for one. Like if someone goes on holiday for 2-3 weeks, their first week back, things probably feel a bit rusty. Mm-hmm. Week 2, if not week 3, you're probably feeling normal again, right? I really like that explanation. I also like that you brought up Agatha, because I was going to ask you, because one thing I really like about you and like your content and everything, like I think you approach things with a really open mind. Like you see, at least from what I see online, that you're quite good at just approaching different methods and stuff with an open mind and like picking it apart and seeing, like giving your like open take on it and stuff. And I wanted to ask you what you were thinking about Agatha, because she's just announced she's doing 7 SBDs a week. And I think obviously it's working for her. But yeah, I was just going to get your input on it.
So Agatha's coach did an interview on Mike's podcast, on the Reactive Training Systems podcast, and he has a lot of really, really interesting takes. I think the most important thing to kind of highlight here is her training is highly polarized. So what that basically means is she kind of operates at like the very low end and on the very high end, and kind of not really in between. So she'll do lots and lots of work at like 50-60%, maybe like low 70%, and then she'll do her heavy stuff, and that's kind of how she chops up a lot of their days, which is very, very different from the kind of powerlifting meta that we're in, where like most people do most of their work between like 70 and 85%, right? That's like your traditional 70 to 85% is like the sweet spot for strength, blah, blah, blah. It's like where you'd read on like Preplin's charts and, you know, traditional strength conditioning stuff. A couple of other things. Agatha is a bit of a powerlifting robot. She loves it, but she's also a full-time athlete who makes money from powerlifting. And she also is kind of continuously doing this thing with her body weight where she's going up, going down, you know, she's moving left and right. So there's a lot of stuff going on with her. What I will say is she's obviously extremely gifted, trains extremely hard, and has a very, very good kind of crew around her. She lifts also equipped and raw. So she is doing lots and lots of SBD work. She's also kind of got like 6 lifts that she's training for, not 3, which again kind of makes it slightly different, right? But it's one of those things where I'm happy to be wrong, right? And I'm also happy to be in the situation of her in particular. Like, I don't know her particularly well. I mean, we've had a few conversations. We've been in a couple of like bars and stuff at the same time, and we've hung out like after championships and stuff, but not like, I don't know her on a personal level. So I couldn't tell you like, does she like powerlifting? Does she love powerlifting? Is she completely obsessed with it? You know, does she just do nothing but think about powerlifting all day long? Or does she train and that's her job and she does that 3 hours a day? And then she just, you know, goes home and has like, I don't know, has a dog that she walks and loves cooking and whatever. I don't know. And I think it's one of these things that kind of really depends. I think a lot of people that really, really struggle to separate themselves from their powerlifting performance are the people that tend to struggle with these burnout type of issues.
Yeah.
And with that sort of stuff. You know, if somebody's got a lot of stuff going on or a lot of other things that they can kind of like pour themselves into, and they're not their total, quote unquote, then it's a lot easier to do something like that if that's just her job and that's just what she does. And that's just what she does, right? In the same way as we have jobs that we go to and we do our work, and then maybe we clock off, or maybe we go home, or maybe we go and do the hobby that we like or whatever. So that's the other thing. But if it works, it works. I don't know how much accessory work she does. I don't know if she deals with any aches and pains on a regular basis. It's safe to say that she probably has been dealt a reasonably good genetic hand for both powerlifting and injury resilience, which is probably one of the things that's like not really spoken about that much. Is like, you know, there have been some amazing talents powerlifting wise in the time that I've been around, where, you know, they've strung together 1 or 2 amazing preps and then had one injury and like never really come back. Just never really been able to get over that injury. You know, had they had that extra 20% injury resilience in their genetics, might have been a world champion, but just couldn't string it together. Who knows? But I hope that both Agatha and her coach do more English speaking, you know, podcasts and articles and whatever, so that they can talk about it, because I think her coach, and I forget the chap's name, has been highly influenced. I think that's it. Yeah. Has been like highly influenced by a number of kind of like American, Canadian, British coaches. A lot of like the Powerlifting Now guys and some bits and pieces from all over the place. And I think that what he's kind of done and put into this situation is really, really interesting. He's kind of taken like a traditional Eastern Bloc weightlifting style of organizing someone's training week, and then used a lot of kind of modern, more Western ways of designing the training to create this kind of like weird amalgamation, which is super interesting. And again, I don't want to say that like anybody owns a RP top set with certain backdowns or whatever, but just when you're talking about like traditional research, literature, that's kind of what I'm referring to there, which I think is really, really interesting. So without more context, to be honest with you, I don't really know. But something's obviously working.
I know they're going to do a seminar soon, I think. I think it's going to be in, is it Polish?
Okay.
Yeah. But they said if there's enough interest, they might do one in English, and I really hope they do. Just to get more context on it. But I think, because I can't remember who it was. It was on one of the King of the Lifts podcasts. Someone was, I think it might have been Nick Manders, was like, honestly, she makes me want to SBD 6 days a week. And I think I'm sitting here and I'm like, how many people are going to want to now try this? Because like, in the back of my mind, I've been like, well, maybe I should try it, you know, maybe I should just test it. But I'm like, my elbows for one would not hack that. And like you mentioned about obviously injuries and everything, like I think people like, she must obviously have very good genetics. She might have niggles and things. She's a full-time athlete, like it is her job, like you say. And I think that's bits that people probably don't realize how helpful those little things are to then be able to recover more. And because she's not going to have to struggle with getting sleep every night, because she's a full-time athlete, right? She can sleep as long as she needs to, eat what she needs to, train, and then have that extra freedom there. So I think that was a really important point to bring up.
Yeah, I think it's one of these things that a lot of people forget when it comes to like training approaches, things that people do, etc. Is it's like, hey, like the context of your life is not the same as this other person. Like, you know, you're a stressed out office worker working 50 hours a week with like wife and kids and, you know, bad nutrition, relatively speaking. This person literally wakes up, has to train 3 hours a day, and that's all they have to do. You know, like you two people are not the same. Like you've got 12 hours of your day that is taken up by other commitments, and you're lucky if you can squeeze a 2-hour training session in. This person has 21 hours of their day free, and they have to train for 3 hours, and that's it. So like these two people are not the same, you know? And I think that's sometimes the issue, is like people think it's the magic program, and it's like, well, maybe, but also it's the context in which that person is living their life, right? Powerlifting's not quite in a place yet, except for maybe Agata and a few others, where people can just train full time and do nothing else. And some people are getting closer and closer to it. Maybe they're running small coaching businesses or a small roster or whatever, which is great. And you know, I've worked with athletes where they've gone and transitioned from working full-time jobs, or maybe having a little bit more of a stressful time at home, to being like, no, I'm gonna wipe my plate clean for this next 6 months and just full-time athlete it up, and maybe have like a part-time job, or, you know, small coaching roster or whatever, do that, and then they just take off. And you're like, well, you know, suddenly we've gone from, generally speaking, a relatively stressful day-to-day life to you train and you recover, and you know, you get a massage once a week, and you focus on your nutrition, you do all these things. And, you know, it's a bad night's sleep if you get 8 hours. It's a good night if you get 10, you know? That's so different from dragging yourself to the gym after 6 hours sleep and your baby's woken you up in the middle of the night, you know? Like, those two things are not the same. And what the athlete can recover from in that context, you know, saying they're the same athlete, are two completely different things. So I think that's really, really important. It's the same what we see, not to put anyone on blast here, but like when people like finish uni and they like get a job, and then, you know, I've been working with the athlete during their time at uni, and then when they go into full-time work, and they're like, oh, like, you know, being an adult's really hard. And I'm like, yeah, life's a little bit different. Like when, you know, you have to work 40-45 hours a week, and then you have to train. It's not like you can just kind of rock up to like, you know, the gym at midday every day, and, you know, you've had a lie and you skipped a lecture, and then you rock up and you do this thing. Like, they're not the same thing. And I think that is both good and bad, because I think it does kind of sift out a lot of the people who didn't really like love powerlifting. But at the same time, it's kind of like, should we have maybe set up this uni lifter to have a slightly more sustainable training approach sooner, so that when they did hit real life, like it, you know, they could just move into it pretty comfortably, or prepare them a little bit better. Which again is something that you're always kind of learning as a coach, and you're always trying to sort of preempt your lifters to make sure that they don't run into these sticky situations and hot water.
Yeah, no, I really like that. It actually reminded me a little bit of, I filmed a podcast clip with Manny the other day, and after the call we were just chatting for a bit, and he was saying to me about we were talking about that transition between like uni to full-time work and stuff, and obviously how it's so common for people to struggle with, which is understandable. It's a massive life change anyway. And it's like, sometimes people just need to maybe take a step back and just do the minimum you can progress on. Don't worry about making the optimal progress. Like, just strip it back, keep training, but just do like the minimum that you know you can still progress on. And then once you're settled, then if you still want to push powerlifting, you can then slowly increase that back up again. Because also, like we said about the recovery thing, like what you can recover from when you're a student is going to be very different to what you can recover from when you're in full-time work, or even just go into part-time work. Whatever you go to do, there is going to be a big difference.
It's just you just don't have as much time, right? And I think that's one thing that a lot of people struggle to conceptualize, is like, what do you mean, you know, suddenly the 12 hours a week that I have to be in a lecture or whatever it happens to be. I know it varies massively by course.
Yeah.
But, you know, the amount of time that you generally have taken away from you in like a uni type situation, or even like, you know, me, when I started in the fitness industry, my job was, I was working 40 hours a week, but it was like super casual. You know what I mean? Like, I rock up at the time that I need to be there, I leave, and I don't have to worry about a thing. Nobody emails me, nobody texts me, nobody calls me. Like, nobody can bother me outside of those hours. And when I'm at work, and that's it. To, you know, times like now where it's like I'm running my business pretty much 24/7, 3 days, like 365, near enough. You know, even when I'm like on some of these international coaching trips and whatever, I'm still like active and present in my business. And, you know, I'm human, I make mistakes. Like, I might have missed a programming update, and suddenly I have to like jump on and update a lifter's program because, you know, I got the week wrong or whatever. And that happens. And that's one of those things where it's like, you know, I wouldn't say I was stressed particularly, but it's something that I have to kind of pay attention to constantly, instead of my old job where it was like, cool, like clock out at 2 o'clock and I'm done. Like I can just train, I can just go home and I don't have to worry about a thing. And those two worlds are miles apart, you know? And it makes a difference. It really does. It really does.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll dive into the business part. So you were a coach, in-person trainer, things like that, and then you kind of, obviously I'm assuming powerlifting just became your niche through that. You went online and you were saying it was around 2016 time you were kind of capped. Is that what you were saying earlier?
No. So I launched a kind of online coaching business in 2016, I kind of branded it relatively early on. Me and a few friends that I used to train with, it just kind of became like a bit of a thing. I don't really know where it came from. I think it was one of the guys that I was training with at the time just kind of like started tagging one of his Instagram posts with like Battalion for whatever reason, don't know why, and they just kind of stuck. And then when I had this kind of surge of inquiries after that first kind of seminar, I was like, okay, cool, well, I'm going to make this like a thing now. And that's kind of where it started. And it wasn't until right around COVID times, so 2019, 2020, so a few years into my online coaching, where I was kind of like I was struggling to manage the amount of client load that I had online plus the in-person stuff that I was still doing. So I worked in person up until 2022. It gradually got less and less and less. It was pretty much at one point like half and half, and then it kind of became like 12 hours a week, so like 3 nights, but for like 4 sessions, and then it became like 2 nights, 4 sessions, and it became like one. I think I did like 6 hours eventually, like towards the end, and then I kind of stepped away. But kind of around about that, I think it was about 2019. JJ came on board. Yeah. I basically wanted somebody that was going to, I saw potential in growth as a coach, but also a coach that could kind of push me forward. Like we were able to healthily disagree on things, but also kind of had certain standards and certain operational and moral and ethical values that we were aligned on, that we were like, okay, cool, we can do this thing. And then I kind of presented to him how it would kind of work as a business model. After having spoken to a number of different coaches about how they ran, more successful coaches, about how they ran their businesses, how they paid their coaches, how they made things work, how they kind of made it work from like a, you know, how do I financially and kind of emotionally incentivize this person to want to do this thing with me. We discussed it, and then I kind of like took all of their answers and kind of went, okay, well, I want to pay him better than that. And then we kind of came to an agreement on how it would work. JJ already had a pretty decent sized roster, which he's like kept on. And then basically we just kind of agreed that when people kind of came into the coaching business that, you know, we would kind of divide off leads. However, he had just moved back to Singapore at the time. He's now the national team head coach and the vice president of the Fed. So he's got a big influence over there. And he works in person as well as online in Singapore. So we kind of now have a footprint pretty much all over the world, which is wicked. So I kind of cover basically like the Northern Hemisphere. So I kind of cover like North America, Europe pretty much. Obviously JJ still has clients here in the UK and all across Europe as well. And then he covers all of Asia, and kind of like UAE and kind of all around the Middle East as well. So he's kind of got clients all the way through there and all the way into like Oceania and stuff, where, I mean, I have a couple down that way as well, but like he kind of covers that a little bit more readily because time zones. So fortunately between the two of us, we can pretty much cover everywhere, due to, you know, the subtle differences in time zone. I say subtle differences. I think there's a pretty big difference to Singapore from here, but yeah, that's how we do things. He's always been really, really big on his like continuing professional education, getting mentorship, learning from different resources and stuff. So he was really, really big on his like PRI stuff, and like Bill Hartman and a couple of like the kind of movementy guys and girls in that space. And I learned a ton from him off the back of that. And then last year, we kind of decided to put our heads to paper and integrate kind of everything that we've learned over the years and then launch a mentorship ourselves. And I was fortunate enough last year to be part of the group of coaches, myself, Jason Koopman, Charlie Marilla, and Norman Chung rewrote the British powerlifting coaching courses, which I think was from the feedback that we had received, kind of like long overdue. And that so far has gone down pretty well. I mean, I haven't done the course since I've written the course, but from everything that like Charlie's fed back on and stuff, it's gone pretty well. So yeah, it's been good. And he's been fantastic. Honestly, I can't fault him. I kind of took away all the things that he didn't like about coaching and just kind of let him do all the coaching. And he's been doing a fantastic job ever since, and works with some really tremendous athletes, and seems to have a really excellent rapport. So yeah, I'm chuffed. He's not anywhere near as active on social media as he used to be. I think because I kind of was like, hey man, like I know you don't like this stuff, you can chill, and I'll kind of take it from here. And I struggle with that too, but he's a great coach, really, really good, and very similar to me in terms of like he's okay with his ideas being challenged, but he also is very much like a critical thinker. Like he wants to think about something conceptually and then break it down in that manner, which I think is really, really good. Kind of like boiling it down to like okay, well, why is this thing working? Like why does Agatha train SBD 7 times a week? Like what is she trying to do with that? What's the bottleneck that they're trying to overcome by doing this thing that often? And then go from there. So yeah.
No, I really, really liked kind of everything you said. I also didn't realize you were involved in I knew the coaching course had been upgraded. I didn't realize you were involved in that. So that's also really cool. Am I right in thinking you were also at the coaching? Well, I don't know if you'd call it a seminar. I can't remember what they called it. That GB held last year.
The coaches conference, yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah, that was fun. I spoke about squatting and kind of like the differences between that raw and equipped, which was interesting. It was put together relatively kind of like I had my stuff, Rob has his stuff, and then it kind of got amalgamated. Obviously Rob's doing some really, really cool stuff now in the coaching space as well. But that was really, really cool. I was, to be honest, quite surprised to get the call up. I was like, I'm not Eric Helms. Do you know what I mean? Like, why am I here? But yeah, came together, was pretty fun. That was a really cool event. I hope that they launch it again, and I hope that they kind of get it going, because I think that could be a really, really cool hub for a number of good coaches to kind of come through. And I think if it's a little bit more organized, like, there are a couple of people that we could potentially get over and call up and whatever. Like, again, Mike T is now in Belgium, so you could get him over, no problem. You could probably get a couple of, like, if you timed it well, like you could definitely get a bunch of like really big names who are kind of like nearby. Like if you did it right after Worlds, as an example, like the majority of the people you're going to want potentially there and talking are going to be like a 150, 200 pound flight away instead of like the other side of the world. So that could be a good thing potentially. So we'll see. But I hope they do it again. I do, because I think there's potential as well for just more and more coaches to be interested and the uptake to be bigger, which I think could be really, really good. So yeah.
With where you said you were quite surprised to get the call up, this isn't something I normally ask the guys I have on, but I do always mean to, I just forget to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, or have you ever struggled with like imposter syndrome as a coach in this space?
Yeah. A whole bunch. In different ways.
Yeah.
I think the two kind of most pervasive things are like these days, whenever I'm kind of like, I don't want to blow smoke up anyone's ass in particular here, but like if I'm in a particularly heated like game day handling situation and I'm either against a really, really high level athlete or a really, really high level coach or both, I sort of have to like kind of check myself from being like, oh my God, like what's going on? Like, oh fuck, have I done this right? Have I done that right? Like this is blah, blah. Like I can't believe that my athlete's going against this person and we're pulling for this or that, or we're doing this or that, or, I won this little mini battle that we had against this person or that person or whatever. There is one that I will take those. I was handling Kibria on behalf of JJ at British this year, and Joey Diva brought in Matt Gary, and we did get him. So that was good. I'll do that one. Matt won't mind me saying that.
No.
But yeah, I got Matt. So that was good. But yeah, there have been a number of situations where like, those things have happened on international stages and they've been really kind of big and scary. And I've been like, like, who gave me this responsibility? This is crazy. The same with, like, honestly, like high level athletes, sometimes just handling them and being like, shit, like, am I doing the right thing? And you kind of second guess yourself, you know, and you're kind of like, oh, like I had it with Manson this year at Worlds. Like, I told Manson and I told Jason like how I thought it was going to go down, what I thought was going to happen, like to the kilo, and it did. And then Manson went out for his like third pull for the win, and I was bricking it because the Italian guy had hit, and I was like, fuck, like, is this too much? Is he going to hit it? This is a big swing. Obviously, he pulled it. It made it look amazing. But that was like, there are a lot of like nail biter, like, have I done the right thing, imposter syndrome type moments. But then also there are a number of times where like I kind of still feel like a little kid messaging some of these coaches that I talk to be honest, on a pretty regular basis now. But I'm like, oh, am I annoying this person by messaging them and asking this question? Like, do they receive value from me in the same way that I receive value from them? Like, am I being a pain in the ass right now? You know, am I, you know, those sorts of things where like I'm curious and I'm just trying to learn. But at the same time, I'm like, I kind of want to be like, hey, do you want to just jump on a call and I can pay you? Or, you know, and a lot of the time they insist that like I don't, but like I kind of also sometimes feel like I'm taking the piss and I don't want to feel that way. And that is one thing that I will say that I did a lot of when I was younger and earlier in my coaching time, is like, if I was curious about what a coach was doing, or I thought they had some really, really cool results, or I thought I had some really, really cool thoughts, like most of the time, these big coaches and these big coaching companies, you can literally go on their website and you can book in like a consultation and you can just pick their brain for an hour and pay them a certain amount of money. And it's often not that much money, like relatively speaking, you know, for what you're getting. Like, you know, if you're a gym owner and you wanted to pull one of these people out for like a seminar, that's going to cost you like hundreds of pounds to do that. And you can get probably 25 to 30% of the stuff that you want to know off that person in an hour in a setting like this, for like, you know, pennies on the pound. Is crazy. So that's one thing that I probably would recommend that, you know, people do if they are curious, because it can go a long, long way, especially if, you know, you're already working with a coach, but you're a coach yourself and you want to learn more, rather than like coach hopping constantly and like kind of sabotaging your own gains by doing that. Like having consults with this and just kind of, you know, learning and coming prepared with questions and thoughts is something that can really like accelerate your development as a coach, especially if you like don't have the networks like we've been speaking about. We're really fortunate to have people to talk to. But you know, that's something that makes a huge difference, I think, in terms of the how quickly you can learn as a coach, but also like you can direct your own learning, which I think makes a huge difference. It can go a really, really long way.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing advice. And I was actually going to ask you if you had any advice to coaches, even coaches kind of in the position where I am, where it's now becoming like full time. Like, you know, what advice would you give? And one thing I was going to say to you about was, obviously you mentioned JJ is really big on development and still developing his knowledge. Obviously you are too, and I guess that probably is a big part of the advice you would give. That's huge.
Doing your best to like not get too locked into an echo chamber. It can be really, really difficult when like people are having success and you're sharing thoughts, you're sharing ideas. You don't want to be, I don't think anyway, you want to be the coach where like, you know, a new coach takes on your former client and they've seen a client before and the program's the same. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see everything kind of looking, oh, okay, all of their guys squat at this time and they all do this and they all do that. It's not that there's a problem with doing similar things. It's powerlifting, right? Everyone needs to get good at squat, bench, and deadlift. And as a coach, you're going to have tools that are going to help you get there. But also you have to expand your toolkit as time goes on, and you have to learn from different resources. So like, I guess the way that I'm kind of developing myself now further and further as a coach is I'm kind of like having a lot of these conversations and these kind of like informal learning scenarios with other coaches and people that I like, respect, and I want to pick their brains on, you know, what have you done with this athlete? How did you do this? Where's kind of your head at with this thing that we spoke about before or whatever? That's kind of one element. And then I'm trying to figure out more and more stuff that feeds into the powerlifting stuff, but like at a higher level. So unfortunately, there's another company called RTS who exist with like a guy called Tom Purvis who runs it, and it's kind of like a bodybuilding biomechanics learning about, you know, that stuff a little bit more, that I'm trying to double down on this year and learn a little bit more on. myself, like I've kind of stepped away from competitive powerlifting myself, and I'm kind of learning more and more about like natural bodybuilding, nutrition, and I'm working with Eric Helms on that. So that side of things is really, really interesting. You know, how differently do they quantify volume? What are they looking at? How do you quantify objectively or subjectively like muscle growth? How do I know that something is stimulating? How do I know that I'm getting stronger if, you know, XYZ thing is changing? Or am I just relatively getting stronger if my body weight's going down? You know, if weight's staying the same, but I've lost 10 kilos, am I now stronger than I was? Or am I just the same, but smaller? You know, there's all those sorts of things that I'm trying to kind of learn from, which I think is kind of, I mean, I would probably say that I've been around for a decent amount of time now. So it's not that things like the Chad Wesley Smith articles and the stuff that I was reading 10, 15 years ago are irrelevant, because I think they're always going to be relevant, but it's kind of like I've learned that stuff pretty well, and I kind of get it, and I kind of understand it, and I kind of understand it both on a conceptual and a kind of practical level. And I'm now trying to kind of figure out tools that are going to allow me to kind of think a little bit more deeply about the thing, is what I'm trying to do. I'm also very, very lucky and grateful that, you know, with things like the mentorship that we ran and stuff, I'm having to know something well enough to teach it now, which is like a whole nother level of understanding something, which makes it very, very challenging, because somebody will ask you a question and you're like, shit, I don't know the answer. And like, I should know the answer, so I'm going to go and find out. So there's some of those things sometimes where you have to kind of continue to develop that stuff. I think in terms of going full time in coaching, it's both harder to do now than it ever has been, and easier. The reason it's harder is there are more people trying to do it. When like I first did it, there were a couple of people trying to do it, but there were a couple of people that were doing it full time already. But like really realistically, the market was like open season. The only problem is that, you know, British powerlifting had probably 1/3 of the members that they do now. So like the market was also tiny, and online coaching was so much smaller. Now market is 3 or 4 times the size. People are more willing and able to pay than ever for online coaching. They're actually also willing to pay more of a premium. You know, they're not everybody's trying to like rip each other off for 40 quid a month now. That doesn't happen anymore as much, at least to my knowledge, or at least the space that I'm in. However, there are more competent, more qualified coaches than there ever have been before. And it also means that the service that you're delivering needs to be at a higher level, or at least the standards at which you hold your service to need to be, you know, to a higher standard. So the issue that sometimes people are running into is like, I think personally, you should attempt to like under promise and over deliver in anything that you do. So if you're trying to sell too hard and you run into that and then your clients are disappointed, it's really, really difficult. I also just think that like there is a space for somebody to have an authentic voice. And as long as you are kind of able to, I guess, kind of speak to your people, quote unquote. This is like not marketing advice. I'm not great at this stuff, but you know, if you can just kind of be you and kind of express yourself well and learn how to communicate well, both through social media platforms, longer form content like this, and then to your clients, that goes a massively long way as well, you know, because it was like super cheesy. Like when I was growing up, you'd have like a footballer who would like retire and then sell some like crap football training something, right, program or a piece of equipment or whatever. And you don't want to be that, but at the same time, you also don't want to be this like super top secret Soviet coach who nobody knows about, who doesn't share any of their thoughts except to their athletes, and, you know, has to get all their stuff translated and whatever. So you kind of have to strike a balance of like kind of being authentically you and kind of whatever that kind of set of principles is for that person, as well as like having an idea and being like, cool, I'm going to try this and I'm going to be honest. I'm going to communicate about this thing and we're going to see what happens. I think they're important. And then I also think like a lot of powerlifting coaches that are kind of on those fringes just kind of need to be all right with like being out there a little bit. Like you're going to take some L's. Everybody does. That's okay. The goal is not to be perfect, right? The goal is to just be better than you were, and you're going to stumble along the way. And like, if you go back far enough, you're going to look at a training program you wrote for somebody and you're going to read it and be like, what? was I doing? Or like training programs that maybe you've done yourself. And ultimately, as long as you're like getting better and like the years go, you go back and you look at it and you're like, oh, this actually wasn't that bad. Like I actually did that today. I had an old client come back to me after 2.5 years, and I went back and looked at his old programs that we've still got and we shared. I looked at it and I was like, oh, decent. Like this wasn't bad. Like it makes sense. Like I was doing an okay job back then. That's good. Like that is a good thing that I'm in that situation and that we're not, I'm not looking at it thinking, Jesus Christ, what was I doing to those people 3 years ago? So, that side of things is definitely a good thing. And I also think that's one sign of, without blowing smoke up my own bum too much here, is like, that's a sign of a good coach. Like if people leave because life stuff happens and then, some percentage of those people come back and they're still powerlifting and they want to work with you again and they don't just want to work with the next random person, like that is a fantastic sign that you did a really, really good job and that you established a really good relationship with that person. I think that probably my other piece of advice actually is just generally like learn about communication and like how to manage relationships well. Because you can't be everything to everyone, but you can definitely be like a better version of you showing up to these people and making sure that they kind of understand what your intentions are and how you can help them. Sounds a bit wishy-washy, but it's like I coach basketball as well, like very, very casually, just at like a club. And you can see how it's pervasive to like a 14 or a 15-year-old who's like learning how to do a certain thing and trying to be, more competitive at a sport. And then all the way into like an M2, who's done internationals and like loves powerlifting and is like obsessed with it and has been their whole life. Like those two people like need the same thing, but it needs to be communicated differently. And, you can't really be like to a 14-year-old boy who's like, thugging out at a basketball court. You can't really tell them that like you're here because you want to help them and you want them to be the best they can be. But you can say that to like 65-year-old Dorothy who thinks it'd be the sweetest thing ever. You know what I mean? So you can say the same thing, but not say the same thing to both those people, and they both need to hear it. But the way you say it's going to be so different, so that it's accepted and that they kind of understand. So I think that's a big, big thing that is like generally just useful advice, I think, for coaches that are trying to do more. Because to be honest with you, once you understand programming, good, great, and world-class coaches are going to probably be within like 10% of each other. Like that's not going to be the thing that's really going to move the needle for you. The thing that's going to move the needle is like how you look after people, and ultimately like how they benefit from being around you as a coach, which I think is super important and also super like underutilized. I think it's something that can make a huge difference in the coaching world in general.
I really, really liked that answer, and we will quickly wrap up in a second because it's getting a bit late. But I just wanted to say on the communication thing, because I started in person, and I think like I don't like to big myself up very much, but I think the communication element is one part that I am really good at, and I think I learned that from in-person training. And obviously, you worked in person for a number of years, and I think that's something that a lot of people that have only ever worked online maybe don't realize how important of a skill that is, or maybe don't give themselves the chance to develop that skill. So I just basically want to get your opinion on if you think that that is something you did get through working with people in person.
Absolutely. That and I remember, I think this was during COVID times. I fired up like a little Discord chat between me and a bunch of coaches that I really like, highly respect and really, really like. And we did probably, it wasn't too many, 4, 5, 6 calls maybe, where we all kind of jumped on and spoke about kind of our different experiences and kind of different things that we kind of watched out for. And a couple of like very, very high profile coaches were in there. And a few of them were kind of talking about like the coach's eye and how much better it gets when you're doing some in-person stuff, and how much better it is when you're able to look at stuff in person and see it, and like how much more quickly you can identify it because you've seen these problems in real life, but also because you're not stuck. So like you can look at the front 15 angle and then look at the side angle and then look at the back and then look at the other side, all in like one set, that you can't do online.
Yeah.
Like there's sometimes a 2, 3, maybe even a week delay between like, hey, film this next set from your left-hand side or whatever, that then you get feedback on and you're looking for the same thing. So coach's eye is massive. But yeah, just soft skills. I know that you haven't asked me for a hot take, but like there's nothing that like pisses me off more than like somebody comes over and they were paying money for a coach and they were like, yeah, so my check-ins were just like a thumbs up. I'm like, what? Like, I mean, I get it. Sometimes, you know, you might have like somebody send in one video and they might be like, hey, I did this thing, does this look better? And you can be like, yeah, it does look better. But like your whole week of training and you get a thumbs up, like that is not on. And I've heard that a few times, sadly. And it's like, you know, if somebody's paying you not a lot of money for your coaching service and the expectation is pretty low, then fine. But also, like, you're really trying to tell me that like the extent of your expertise is an emoji. Like, you know, have some respect for yourself in that instance, and like give them a value as a coach, even if it's repeating yourself on like, hey, this cue we worked on 2 weeks ago, you're really nailing it, thumbs up. You know, that's that's so much more valuable than just a thumbs up emoji. So yeah, that's what I think. I think it can be developed in a number of ways. Game day handling is one. If you're an online coach, like just go there and do it and volunteer and get in front of people, because, you know, you're going to see your clients in person. You're going to see how they move. You're going to see weird things that you never noticed on video, and you can just talk to them about it probably afterwards. Probably don't do it during the comp, but you know, there are a number of things that you can get benefit from there. I don't necessarily know if we're even in a space where online coaches can step back and go in person necessarily, but club coaching can be really, really valuable, or even offering to just lend a hand at club coaching situations could be really, really great.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect way to end the episode too, because I have kept you longer than I planned to, but I really appreciate your time. I don't know if you guys have spaces at the moment, but if you do, or just plug your socials so people can find you.
You can find me at Peej Squats. It's spelled bizarrely. I probably should have never launched with it, but there you go. At Battalion Barbell, you can find me, and you can find JJ at lift_NG on Instagram. I think as of recording right now, I don't think I have any spaces. I posted something up a couple of weeks ago and they got snapped up very, very fast, but do inquire if you're curious, and if not, we can kind of always refer you out to other people. We'll be running on like a waiting list type of situation. But yeah, that's that.
Brilliant. Thank you for joining me. No, of course. Thank you for coming on.